I never watched Buffy. I never watched it. I always saw like the last 15 minutes of it because Dawson's Creek came on after it. Well,
welcome to Entertainment Weekly's Binge, where we take an in-depth look at some of our favorite projects. I'm Sam Heifel, and for the next 8 episodes, we're going to be digging into all 8 seasons of The Vampire Diaries. For season 1, I'm joined by our co-creators, Julie Plec and Kevin Williamson. Thank you both so much for being here.
thank you for having us.
Of course. I do want to preface this, spoiler-wise, by saying this is the opposite of a spoiler-free podcast. We are going to be talking about all the things that happened. And while certainly we will be focused mainly on season 1, do our best to keep it to that, sometimes memories pop into people's heads. Sometimes stories go places. So I'm going to go ahead and say, listen to this podcast after you've watched all of the Vampire Diaries. It's been out for more than 10 years. It started in 2009. Go finish it. Come here. See what everyone has to say. I want to start. I mean, I know you all have certainly told this story. You've told it to me a little bit, but for the purposes of this podcast, let's get the origin story of this series. How did this all come about?
Julie, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, in a nutshell, because I do think a lot of people have heard the story, but it's a good Hollywood story. Kevin and I were having lunch with a good friend of ours, somebody who had been Kevin's second assistant when I used to work for Kevin as his development executive way back in the day. And this is a woman named Jen Breslow, who at this point was an executive at the CW.
And was one of our best friends.
Yes. And we had been just hanging out. It'd been sort of a rough time emotionally. So we were having like a friend catch-up lunch. And the subject of vampires came up because Twilight was about to come out and True Blood was on the air. And it was just, vampires. And Kevin was a huge True Blood fan. And I was a huge fan of the Twilight books. And we were just sort of like, it's a shame the vampire genre is over because we never got a chance to be a part of it. And then Jen said, well, I don't think it's over because we have a book at the CW that we've been trying to find writers for, called The Vampire Diaries. It's a book series. And Kevin, do you remember what you said? Because you were like, ugh.
Yeah, I thought the Vampire craze would be over because by the time you start a project and adapt it and get it to screen and get going, it's just over. I thought we would be the nail in the coffin. So we kept talking about that, how it was the end of we would kill the vampire craze. And,
it would be all our fault.
Yeah.
But he's like, I don't really want to do that. I've read that book. I know that book. I don't want to do that.
Well, they sent me the Vampire Diaries previously before it went to CW as a movie, as a potential. My agent had sent it to me earlier from Alloy as a movie, and I hadn't even read it. I was like, no, I'd do it aside.
Nah. But I was like, thirsty. I was young and hungry. So I'm like, I'll do it. And Jen was like, that wasn't really what she was, I think she had in mind.
And I would only do, and I said, I'll do it if Julie does that. I said, we have to do this together. I just wasn't sure I wanted to do something alone at that time. I wanted to work with you and we decided to do it together. And she was like, yeah, I'll do it. And so you read it first.
I started it first.
Julie, and then she called me up and she goes, what page are you on? And I said, 64. And you said, stop reading.
I did.
Scared that because of the Twilight comparisons, she was scared that I would you didn't want me to say no, I think is what it was. And then I ultimately, we filled in the blanks and, the rest is history. It turned out to be the best book ever.
Yeah. It was so much like Twilight though. That was really the thing. I'm like,
did she?
I went and checked the cover page to see what year it was written, and it was written in I think like 1991.
There was a rumor that Stephanie, who wrote Twilight, had read these books growing up. Is that true or not?
I have no idea.
I feel like someone told me that, and I don't know if it's true or not. It could just be like folklore, urban legend at this point.
But obviously,
that's how it was born.
you find something in there. You find something in that story that you want to build out and take it. What was it that you feel like you really grasped onto within that story?
For me, it was the town. It was Mystic Falls, which in the books was Fells Church. there was just something. I was such a big Buffy fan, and I had just really in the last 5 years done the whole Buffy thing. Watched all the episodes from start to finish, and I always loved Sunnydale and the ensemble, the Scooby Gang. Like I love that energy of kids just kind of trying to make it through the day. And so it honestly, I knew the love triangle would work because of Twilight, and didn't know quite how to do that to make it new and fresh, but there was just something about this town where like mystical shit was always happening that I thought was a really good platform for a show that then, just kind of find your voice, find your tone and go from there. And Kevin, I think you liked, I can't remember, but I think you really liked the Katherine Pierce.
Well, that, and I agree with you about the town because Dark Shadows was one of my favorite shows when I was growing up. And I thought, well, if we could just maybe not, can lean into the town and everything that's going on in the town. Because remember when we read in the book, I think it was there so many soldiers' blood had shed on this ground during the Civil War, so that it attracted, sort of these, the paranormal or supernatural. And I thought that was really fascinating, and that there's a lot of longevity with that. But I also connected to the young girl, Elena, who had lost her parents and, was dealing with death, and, because grief and loss is, Julia and I's favorite subject. And so, we write a lot about it. And I sort of connected mainly to this young girl who needed to be brought back to life. And she was brought back to life by a dead guy.
Well, getting into the pilot and getting into my favorite thing, we've talked a lot about like the chemistry between, everyone. You can talk about the brother chemistry. You can talk about Stefan and Elena, Damon and Elena. But watching that pilot, every time I watch it, which is like 100 times by now, there's a different moment where I just cannot believe that this chemistry exists. And for me, watching it through this time, it was that scene on the bridge when Stefan and Elena are talking, and she's talking about her relationship with Matt. And she says it just wasn't, and he looks at her and he's like, passionate. And I legitimately I cannot, every time they interact. What was you all's reaction to seeing, because like this show doesn't work unless Stefan and Elena have that chemistry. What was kind of your reaction to those moments?
The leaf
in the cemetery. That was it. That was our moment,
We looked at each other then and was just like, that works. They have chemistry. We thought it existed, and we were like, did we just see that? Did we just see the chemistry? Did that just happen?
We have history together. The scene you're talking about, Sam, was so flippin' cold that night, and we were like racing the clock. And because I think that particular scene, we either shot right at magic hour so we could have a little bit of natural light, or right at sunrise. I can't remember. But it was cold AF. Like we were just suffering. So I'm not sure we were watching for anything deeper than just survival. But yeah, the cemetery leaf moment was the first scene they shot together.
I remember we were hung up on that bridge scene was about the, it's not where he says something to her, like it won't hurt forever or something.
Oh yeah.
You won't be sad forever.
You won't be sad forever, Elena.
You won't be sad forever. Nice, thanks.
And we were really, really trying to I remember that was like a line we were really focused on in that scene. And, I remember for Paul, it was a big moment.
I forgot about that scene. Completely forgot about that scene.
It was a miserable day of shooting.
It's horrible. Just anecdotally, we had picked out an entire location in Vancouver. It was so beautiful. And we were like, had this amazing setting for that. And then like a week prior, there was a snowstorm, and we woke up and there was snow everywhere, which wouldn't have matched with the rest of the show. And so we had to, I can't remember if we found that location was the new location, or if we just like took a lot of heaters out there and melted it. But it was pilot season is the worst because you're always shooting in like rain, snow, shitty weather, gray skies, no leaves on the trees because it's not spring yet, and everything's always ugly. And you get to like episode 2, like everything's pretty again.
I forgot all about the snow. I remember that. Wow.
I also love in that pilot the final moment when Stefan goes to Elena's doorstep. Paul is almost on the verge of tears tears, like in a way that like he just had to know she was okay. And I've always wondered, like, was that scripted? Like, was the on the verge of tears thing, was that a Paul moment?
I remember he was scared to come to the door, and he because of the Katherine connection, and we didn't know why at that time, but we knew there was this emotional stake for him to get to know her, that he was going to take the risk.
Wait, I just had a memory flashback, and I could be totally making this up. But I think, oh God, I wish Paul was on the other end of this phone call right now, because like, I think it was so cold that his eyes wouldn't stop watering.
Is that what it was?
I think so. And he was freaking out about it because it's like, because it's like he had tears dripping from his eyes. I don't know. That just popped into my head. I will have to fact check that.
Yeah,
I'm going to fact check that, but I have like this weird memory.
I remember the big thing for me in that scene was when he steps across the door, the threshold, and we were running out of time. And I was like, are we going to get an insert of the feet crossing the threshold? And it turns out we didn't need it. But I wanted, because it was so symbolic of the vampire lore, but also she's inviting him into her world and her life, and he's also being invited in as a vampire. It had, it was a big moment, but we couldn't turn away from their faces. They had the most amazing look, and once again, their chemistry was there. And
it was when we saw the cut for the first time. We hadn't picked that song. We hadn't done any of the music work yet, and Kevin and I were in the editing room with Marco Siega, who directed the pilot, and then Josh Butler, who edited it. And it got to the end and that song played. And as the door is opening and he's stepping in, it's the fray, don't let me go. And we burst into tears because it was such the perfect music moment. And it was such a beautiful surprise. So we got to experience that as fans seeing it for the first time. Like, it wasn't like, oh, we don't have the right song for this. What are we going to do? Blah, shove something in and hope for the best. It was a totally magical viewing moment where that's, I think, when we realized that we had something pretty great. It's how we felt at the end of that episode when we watched it the first time, I think. Kevin, if I'm making any of this up, you have to correct me.
Well, I mean, you mentioned like Stefan needing to be invited in. And one of my big questions for you all is, how did you decide, you mentioned Twilight's a thing, True Blood's a thing, so many different vampire stories. How did you all kind of decide the rules of your vampires, what they can and can't? I love that Stefan gives that whole speech of like, garlic's delicious, crosses don't do anything to me, that whole spiel. What kind of went into you all thinking of what the rules were for your vampires?
Was it the book, Julie, that we really kind of leaned on in that area? I can't remember. I do remember that there was a big discussion about what kills a vampire, in terms of, is it going to be, are we going to stake them, or is it the separation of heart and head? And that's what, so that you burn them or decapitate them or stake, kill the brain or the heart, and you do it. But there was that conversation. And then, the vervain was in the book. And
where the daylight rings must have been in the book. But I do know that we were like, we are not shooting a show where all the scenes have to take place at night. We're just not doing it. Yeah. And so whether the daylight rings are in the book or whether we like very cleverly like co-opted them from something else.
We didn't want to have no cross because of the religious connotation with it. We didn't want to the association of religion and cross. The crucifix, I think that was a network thing or something, or we didn't want to do it because we just didn't want to go there.
Yeah, we really wanted to avoid any of the obvious stuff that, like the Dracula stuff. We just wanted to kind of have enough homage to that without having to be dependent on those rules. And I remember we had like a bajillion debates about how you turn someone into a vampire. Because if I'm remembering correctly, the explanation in the book wasn't really fleshed out that much. So we like go back and read it and be like, do you understand how this works? I'm not sure I understand how this works. And then even when we were writing the Vicky Donovan Lost Girls, and the episode where she becomes a vampire, I remember like going back and forth about how we were going to make that work. And first you have to have vampire blood in your system, and you have to die, then you have to wake up, and then you have to feed, and it's the whole thing. It turned out working really well for us though. Like, that choice was a really smart choice over the years, because we were able to, that 24-hour window in which you have that choice, whether to like just let yourself fade away and die, or to feed and actually become a vampire, like giving the characters that agency, worked for us long term. So it was a happy accident.
You drank my blood, I killed you, and now you have to feed in order to complete the process.
You're wasted.
You don't want to be out there all alone. You're about to get really freaky.
Look, I had a really good time. I just want to go home.
You're gonna start craving blood, and until you get it, you're gonna feel very out of it. You have to be careful.
Come on, move.
I want to get to the Vicky death, but before that, I feel like the first kind of big mystery that you all were pacing out when you were writing this season was, at what point does Elena figure it out, right? Like, at what point does she discover that Stefan's a vampire, which you all do pretty quickly in the grand scheme of like a 22 episode season, which I always appreciated. But what was kind of the conversation of pacing that out? Did you consider dragging that out? Did you kind of want to get it done quickly?
It was a conversation. I remember we talked about it, but I wasn't a fan of there's no way you're going to get all the way to the end of first season. And I mean, there's no story. You got to get on with it.
Everything you know and every belief that you have is about to change. Are you ready for that?
What are you?
I'm a vampire.
Both Kevin and I have this general instinct, or he had it and I learned it from the best, which is like, hold off something long enough to get good story out of the mystery, but not so long that you end up having to create more mystery than you needed in the first place. Like when the obstacles are organic and when you're like, the tension of the secret is working for you, live in that secret. But then surprise the audience by busting through it, as opposed to drawing it out over 17, 20 episodes. And the other thing that we did, which he had never really done, and as a fan of television, I had never really been a fan of, which is we had them kiss in like the second episode.
Yeah.
First episode? No, second episode,
Second
right?
episode,
yeah. The Sarah Bareilles, right? And
yeah, it's Gravity by Sarah Bareilles.
Gravity. Yeah. Thank you. Because it was So You Think You Can Dance.
Yeah.
That's why we knew that song so well.
I remember that whole thing. Yeah.
It's a great dance routine. That was a moment.
So good. But like having them kiss in episode 2, which was like usually love stories, you're just like building and building and building, and will they or won't they? And da 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 da. And I guess because we know that ultimately there was like a third party involved who was going to be creating tension in that relationship, that we felt the freedom to get them to a place and then walk it back.
Yes, we wanted to get them together so that we could have them, Damon interrupt us happen.
Damon interrupt us.
Well, I do want to obviously get to Damon, your first villain of the series, who obviously becomes much more than that. But I know, Julie, you've talked a lot about kind of Kevin's role in like really discovering Damon's voice. Kevin, for you, did that kind of come to you relatively easily? Was there any specific inspiration for Damon?
It's just that inner voice that is so snarky. All the things you want to say out loud, but you can't. And he was so snarky, and I just loved writing. They're the fun characters to write. It's like he was just so much fun to sit down. If you're going to stay up all night and write a script, it's fun to write a voice like that. I had the same experience with The Following with Joe Carroll, the serial killer. The bad guys are always more fun to write. They just are. They always have been.
Yeah.
John Varvatos. Dick move.
I was about to say, that's I wrote it down in my notes. One of my all-time favorite Damon moments is this is John Varvatos. Like, oh, so good.
This is John Varvatos, dude. Dick move.
And that came about because they were always wearing John Varvatos.
Yeah.
That was like those t-shirts. They were constant. It was their every week wardrobe. And I just was like, okay.
No, but like my favorite Damon line, and you're talking about the mysteries that we're building. So, my favorite Damon line is, oh God, I'm like, what? ...
That's for me to know and for you to ... Give Elena my best.
The origins of that line, which are so great. Every writer loves to complain about network notes. And we just kept getting from like the pilot, every script that we handed in, every story area that we handed in for like the first 3 or 4 episodes. Like every time anybody read a script of the network, they were like, yes, but what's Damon's drive? Like, what does Damon want? And we were like, oh my God, he just wants to be an asshole. but especially Dawn Ostroff, who was the head of the network at the time, she was obsessed with what does Damon want.
And we also didn't have the mythology truly figured out. We
didn't know yet.
Because we had so many things on the table. We didn't really know why did he come back? What's the connection with Katherine? Did she have doppelganger? There was so much to figure out. So, and
we just kept getting the note, and it was so annoying because we knew we were building a big mystery, but it's like, you don't just spell it all out in the second episode. And it was an executive, I think it was Heather Caden, who was an executive at Warner Brothers at the time. And she said, sometimes I've just found the best way to answer the what do they want question is throw the question back at them, throw the mystery back at them. And so then there's we just kept having Stefan say, what is it that he wants? I just don't know what he wants. I don't know why he's here. Why is Damon, why are you here? And then finally, Damon, what do you want? And Damon saying, that's for me to know, and you did ... which we felt very smug about. I love that line so much when Kevin wrote it, because it was just basically a little bit of an F you.
We truly, I don't think knew, we were torturing the writers, trying to come up with the right mythology and the right, what does he want? And only when we latched on to the church and
oh my God,
that's when it all clicked for me.
Yeah, totally. I remember that a light bulb went off in the room and over your head. And it was somebody said, but I don't even know who it was. And maybe it was you, but it was, there's a tomb underneath the church. And it went, boing, and we had it. And
I just remember Katherine's under it. And then he spends his entire season trying to get her, but he's not there. She's not there. And that was the best outcome. And then it was a big surprise. It all worked for me. It clicked. All that that's when the writers' room really came together. I felt like when we all started, the mythology was, came together for us.
That was a rough go. The biggest problem of launching Vampire Diaries was that, they make you write this pitch document when you make a pilot, which is here's what the first 6 episodes are going to look like. And you wait till the last minute because you're so busy doing everything else and you're so fried, and you kind of make it all up, right? I mean, that's a writer's little secret. You make it all up. And then you hire a writer's room, and you're supposed to have all these questions answered before you go into the writer's room, but you don't, because you just killed yourself making a pilot, then hiring writers, and you've got 5 minutes before the room starts, and there's all these faces looking at you okay, what are we doing? And it took us so long to figure out what the tone of the show was going to be, because I was such a Buffy fan. So in my head, there was a Buffy-ness to it. And so we hired all these writers, that were big, huge, comic book fans or Doctor Who fans or sci-fi fans and Buffy fans. And then we got deep in, and nothing was working. It was working. And Kevin's can I be honest with you about something? I won't tell you which show he says he hates, but, it pretty much encapsulates everybody that we had hired. We had hired for all the wrong reasons, basically.
It's just, I never watched Buffy. I never watched it. I always saw the last 15 minutes of it because Dawson's Creek came on after it. that was the extent of my Buffy, and I feel bad about saying that because it's such a beloved show. But so Julie would go, well, there was this episode in Buffy, and I'd be like, huh? I don't know what you're talking. I never saw it. I don't know what you mean. And she goes, but what about the episode when this happened? I'd be like, I don't know what you mean. I didn't watch Buffy. And I lean towards, I always wanted a really dark, scary show. I wanted the show to be scary because I feel like the romance works better when you don't focus on the romance. I mean, the romance shouldn't be 90% of the show. It should be that thing that you scare. I don't know. I think to make it truly emotional, you need to have stakes. And the way to make the stakes for relationships work is to concentrate on the stakes and the scares and not so much on, I'm just telling a love story every week. Because I feel like that just burns out. Love stories just burn out.
We had this quippy voice in our head, so everybody was working off a quippy voice. And then Kevin, so great. I remember this so vividly. There's a handful of moments where I remember your epiphany that your pitch, let's kill Jeremy at the top of the second season or whatever. we were trying to figure out why the football episode, Friday Night Bites, why it wasn't totally working. And like what, it was a charming story. It was a lot of fun. Like we had good story, good incident, but like it just didn't feel right yet. And he was like suffering over it. And finally he calls me up. He's like, okay, so Damon does all this terrible stuff. And as usual, and Stefan doesn't understand why he's there. And Damon kills Coach Tanner, and he's just like this evil guy. And Stefan's at his breaking point. And Stefan's like writing in his journal. He's like, this is it. Like, there is no redeeming him. There is no, he is an unredeemable person. He is villained as the day is long. He is evil, and there's nothing good about him. And he goes, and then you cut while he's saying this to Damon, and he's standing over Elena's bed, and he's like, what's he going to do? Is he going to kill her? And then as Stefan's saying, there's nothing good about him, he just leans over and he brushes her face tenderly. And that's all he does. And I went, oh my God, like, that's it. And it was moments like that early on that like Kevin had to search and hunt and find that like just are so definitive to the tone of the show. And the more we understood that and like fell into that, it just like the show was able to get better and better and better.
Well, talking about pivotal moments for the show, let's talk about killing Vicky. Obviously becomes such a part of what that show is, of never knowing if someone's going to die. But
it got really difficult because we decided we were going to kill her early on. For me, I said, we got to take a main character and kill her. She seemed like the appropriate character to kill to move the story forward in the way in which we wanted to move it forward. And then as we got closer to doing it, I fell in love with the actress so much. Kayla Ewell was just the most beautiful human being you'll ever meet. And I didn't want her to leave the show. I didn't want to lose her from our lives. And we were scared. And luckily that didn't really happen. She stayed in our lives. But we were so torn about it towards the end, but we had already made the decision and we knew it was what was best for the show. And for those very reasons you said, because it really blew the show up. We have real stakes. We will kill people. This is, and we wanted that.
Yeah. And Kayla has told the story, and so I'm not speaking out of school by talking about it, but she struggled on the pilot. Like she never quite hit her groove. She didn't feel confident. She, they're all young actors. Everybody was super green in their own way. And she just was nervous, and you could tell. And so when it came time for us to start breaking the season, and we, and knew we needed a big kill, she was sort of the first on the chopping block. And so we wrote this entire plot for her and all this story for her. And then she showed up to work for episode 1, and she'd been studying and she'd been like doing all her work, and she was so good. And I remember I think Marcos was on set, or I was on set. One of us called each other. We were like, oh shit, Kayla's really good in this scene. She's really doing great work. But we were like, well, too bad. Sorry. It's just one of those moments where the story is way too good to switch gears. But one of the reasons why we keep bringing dead people back to life on the Vampire Diaries because of people like Kayla, because when you have a person that makes that much of an emotional impact on your set and to your crew and with the other cast members, it's just sort of, you just want to be around them. And then she was definitely one of those people.
And she really, and once we were watching the dailies of her dancing around with Ian, and it was so magical, and it was so, I was like, do we really have to kill her? Do we really have to kill her?
Yeah.
It worked.
This is such a random aside, but whenever I rewatch the scene where she first says the word vampire to Matt, I don't know what the lighting situation is in that scene. Matt's eyes are never more blue than the moment when Vicky says vampire. It looks CGI. It's insane.
Maddie blue eyes. God bless.
Well, let's talk about flashbacks, because I think I'm remembering this correctly, Julie, where you said you and Kevin kind of disagreed a little bit, had a debate about whether even to include them.
Oh,
Kevin
yes.
basically played the biggest mind game.
I was on the no side, and Julie was like on the yes side, if I remember correctly. And I was completely wrong about that one.
He was so mean about it, though, like in a fun way, like in a bust your Charles prank run away, where he goes on this whole like discussion about how like everything you learn about writing flashbacks, if you have to use flashbacks to tell your story, then it's not good writing. And like, you know, which at the time was very true. But the whole writer's room sort of was like,
and that still holds true, actually, if you're not designing a flashback show.
Yes, I agree. So he made us take a vote. Like everybody stated their case and everyone was like, but flashbacks are good for this and da, da, da. And he goes, I think we should vote on it. And like goes around and I'll put little slips of paper and like dump them in the hat. And at the end, he reveals his vote and he had voted yes for flashbacks. And that's how that was born.
Well, because because when I took the vote, I was leaning towards doing them. You know, because we were already starting to formulate what we were going to do with them. And then, because Julie kept pitching what we would see and what would happen and and I'd be like, oh, well, that's really good. That'll be fun to do. But no, I hate flashbacks, but then I voted for them.
And we didn't originally, like, it didn't occur to us originally, and not to me, it might have occurred to you, Kev, that Nina should play Katherine and Elena, because there was just like, in the books, they called it a striking resemblance. Mm. And I remember like Italia Ricci, who had tested for Elena early on, and it was like, would have been one of her first jobs. She's brand new. Comes up to us at Comic-Con after the show gets picked up. And she's like, I am putting myself like in front of you to say, I would like to play Katherine Pierce. And we were like, oh.
We'd already used the photo of Katherine. We'd already used the photo of Nina. And so I wasn't even sure Katherine was going to come back. I mean, we just didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing. So.
Yeah. I don't remember like how we made that decision, but it wasn't like an instantly, like we had to kind of get there because she wasn't the doppelganger in the books. I don't think. I think we made all that up.
I was about to say, so like when Nina auditioned, there was no sense of like, now give us your best Katherine.
No.
Okay. Interesting.
We were just looking for one more way to turn the story.
All right.
Because that's where it was whatever we could do to turn the story and give us more life and give us more storylines and because like we sat around. I remember my whole big dilemma was the minute we make Damon nice, we have to bring in a new villain. Because, that was that was my biggest fear. If we don't have a villain, there's just no stakes. We can't have a lovable villain. That's great. And that's a fan favorite character, but that doesn't bring you real storytelling with real stakes. And so I kept saying and that's what happened. Every time one of the villains turned nice, we brought in a new one.
No, it's true. It's true.
He turned nice.
And not to jump ahead seasons, but that is the single most reason why you said Damon has to kill Jeremy, because people loved Damon too much. And it was basically like we had this magnificent villain who could do no wrong in the eyes of the audience. And we thought, well, let's give him something really wrong that is unforgivable so we can buy ourselves another year of him as the villain and Stefan as the hero. Yeah, and poor Damon. Poor Damon. He's so misunderstood.
To kill Jeremy. Poor Damon. I mean, that's what happened.
Oh my God.
He just loves Elena so much. And I'm crying for Damon. And we were aghast. Aghast. We were like, what have we wrought? Like, we have basically accidentally created like the poster couple for toxic masculinity. Like, the women loved him, and we just we couldn't understand it at all. And that was a moment. That was a moment.
Yeah, I'll jump back to season 1, but I do have to say, because 201, which I know you all wrote, is one of my top 3 episodes, I think. And the parallel you all wrote of Katherine, Stefan tells Katherine that he hates her. And she says, that sounds like the beginning of a love story, not the end of one. And then you have Elena saying, I hate Damon at the end of it. It's just so beautiful. It's so good.
I came back for you.
Well, the problem, Katherine, is that I hate you.
You hate me, huh? That sounds like the beginning of a love story, Stefan, not the end of one.
I hate him, Stefan.
That's classic Williamson.
Yeah.
So good.
And that was born from Say Anything.
Oh,
Was it?
Well, at the end of the movie, there's in the airplane, and she goes, "They say we'll never make it," and he goes, "I think you just described the beginning of every love story."
Oh.
And so I took that was always in my head, and then I think we just kind of we just sort of went from that.
wow.
Now I don't even know who, but I always love that moment.
One thing I want to touch on is, were werewolves always a part of it for you all? Because I'm always amazed when I rewatch it how early, I mean, it's still episodes in, but you get that shot of Tyler and a full moon behind him. It always catches me a little. I was like, oh, that's soon. They were planting the seeds of that. So was that always part of the story?
Yeah, that was a book. That Tyler Lockwood was the werewolf in the book for sure.
Right.
And I remember Kevin really wanted to foreshadow it as much as possible because Tyler was such a stock trope dickwad character. Like there was just nothing nuanced about him in the books and in our show. And so the thinking was if you lean into that tropiness, but then just give a little hint of like where that's coming from, you're telling the audience, like, you're in on the joke with us a little bit.
And we were also super excited to move beyond vampires. You know, it's like, because like Julie was saying, she wanted more like a Buffy world or a Buffy universe. And I wanted Dark Shadows. And I remember we went down the Succubus road and we went down the werewolf. Yeah. And so there were so many, I mean, I just wanted other creatures in the show. Like we got the witch and then we just wanted to expand and build the universe. And so I was all for it, you know, but we, you know, the Succubus didn't quite make it. Matt's mother.
Succubus. Well, I mean, what's crazy about that is that got written, shot, and additional stories broken about it before we realized, like, what are we doing? This just doesn't feel right for this show. Early on, we had a pitch in our original, like before anything was written, and there's just the writers, we were all pitching about a gargoyle that came to life in the cemetery. And very early on, we were like, oh, that's just not this show. This show doesn't work with magical beings, which hilariously, when we came back around to Legacies 10 years later, I said, oh, gargoyle. Let's do it. We got to do a gargoyle. And it worked because it worked for that show. The tone of that show could support a gargoyle in a way that Vampire Diaries just never wanted. It was like oil and water, weirdly.
Well, getting more toward the end of the season, you've got obviously 119 is Damon and Elena dance, magical moment. You've got Stefan off being the Ripper, which is actually, was the Ripper twist, was that from the books? Was that something you all introduced?
I think it was in the book. Wasn't it? I don't know. Or you came up with it. Maybe you can. I don't remember.
I mean, it was probably me just paying homage to Angel, frankly. Like, let's be real. That's half my ideas.
I don't think I came up with that one at all. I feel like that was you or The Room or something. I can't remember.
I think I came up with Humanity Switch because, and it really came from
on and off. You came up with It
came one because I'm very adept at dissociating myself from grief trauma, and I was liking it to like a switch that I can turn off and on when I don't want to feel bad. But also in reading, and making all of these shows and reading stuff about vampires, it was always really hard for me to get past the actual murderous, predatory behavior of a vampire. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, now you can't do any of that shit, any of the seductiveness, any of it. But like, even then I'm like, they're kind of like really pathological, like demonic serial killers. And how do we portray them at their worst and then still find redemption for them on the other side? And so I don't know, I just like the idea of a humanity switch, which is like things get to be so, the trauma and the grief becomes so heavy that escaping it seems like a better path than not, and so once they escape that heaviness, then they're free to behave with their primal directive, which let the characters have all that freedom to be horrific, Yeah.
In our season 1, I think the writer's room mantra was epic. Everything had to be epic.
Everything.
And we were just epic. Where Julie wrote my favorite line of all time, which was, I was feeling epic.
The sun came up. Yeah.
And it's episode 2. But my favorite passages is the monologue she wrote at the end of 2, right? About the kiss, and I was feeling epic. Those were my
The callback line. I don't know if I wrote. Did I write that? I feel like you pitched that. The callback to that. I was feeling epic. That might be yours.
I don't know, but in my mind, I think you wrote it.
Okay, that's fine. I'll take the credit. Yeah.
I know you wrote that monologue.
Yeah, that was. I felt good about that one.
In the script, but when I saw it performed in the dailies, when we were sitting in the editing room, I was like, "Oh my god!" And then you put that song to it, and you weren't happy with the way the song was hitting, and you kept telling, "No, move the frames, move the." And you were like, and you were wait, and you were just editing the music to it, and she nailed it. It got just perfectly, and I went, "Oh, that's so good."
Well, I remember they kiss right as Sarah Bareilles like hits that note, and it's just so good.
That's Julie Plec.
Well, I do want to talk about music moments a bit because you've mentioned The Fray. We've talked about Gravity. Julie, I saw you tweeted recently about like you heard Matt Kearney's All I Need and actually like wrote a scene to it. Like how often did that happen for you in terms of music on this show?
We almost never wrote a scene to a song. I don't think. I mean, I'd have to go back and try to figure that out. But like Josh Butler and Lance Anderson, who were two of our season 1 editors, were so gifted at the music moments that we got to experience a lot of those, like what the moment we experienced with the Fray song, where we just heard the song cut into the episode and lost our minds. And then Chris Miller, our music supervisor, was just so good at getting the songs, right? And so like Jason Walker's down.
Because we filmed the moments of Jeremy looking at his dead parents in the photo, Caroline sitting there in the Mystic Falls grill. And we knew there'd be music. We just didn't.
Oh, yeah.
Knew what the music would be. Yeah.
And, I mean, the problem with the CW at the time was that they just insisted that the pilots be filled with pop music, just like recognizable music. Every song needed to be a pop song, a hit song. The idea being that when you go to test it with the market research, that the audience would just be like, yeah, I love this song, dial up, and
right.
it was kind of like the reason why the pilot itself is so it's got the Killers, or it's actually, no, we had to change it to One Republic, but it's got, I don't even remember, but every pop song from the moment. And it doesn't fit with the rest of the show at all.
We didn't get Human, did we?
No, Human was in the cemetery when she's walking and going to visit her at the cemetery. And then I think that's where we switched it to One Republic to All I Need.
Or something. Yeah.
One Republic is playing when she's like walking in with her bag into the cemetery.
It was Human.
Yeah. But like, no, I mean, like the Mads Langer song at the end of 104, when Elena, the Who Are You song, when she's like staring at the mirror and figuring out like putting all the pieces together. Like I saw that sequence for the first time and it blew my mind because that song. Even better, the song For the Weight of Us, which is the song where Jeremy is so upset because Vicky's dead, and Damon and Elena, like Stefan and Elena are talking about, what to do, and Damon shows up in his like James Dean costume and is like, I'll handle it.
I'll do it.
That song, we didn't have a song there. And I don't know if they put something in that we couldn't get or whatever, or it just wasn't right yet. And Miller walks in with this Sanford Belke song. I don't know who Sanford Belke was at the time. I don't even know if the guy had a label. Like, I don't know where the song came from, but he drops that song in and we just like cried. It's still, every time I hear that song, I cry and cry and cry. And then one of the most popular songs of the whole season, that song where Damon and Elena dance, and also when Stefan and Elena have sex for the first time. Those are both Christian songs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That Josh Butler knows a good song when he hears it. He doesn't care where it comes from. They're both Christian songs.
I like the kiss at the end of the finale.
No, I am yours. Crippled anger, and tears are still
Well, that's Bloodlines. And I didn't like that song the first time I heard it. I didn't like it. And I said, I don't like that song. And Marcos was like, you're out of your mind. We're keeping the song.
I think I might have been hitting you. I can feel it.
And I was like, excuse you.
You know something else? I was freaked out because you sent me to post on that one. And because I think you took a trip or you were out of town or doing something, and I had to go post that show. And I was paranoid because I was terrified that I would not get the music bubble right. I would not get because Julie was really good at that. And I remember just going, is that hitting where it should hit? Is that hitting on the right? I was so panicked because I didn't want to get it wrong.
Yeah, I came to love that song deeply, but I did not like it in that moment the first time I heard it. And everyone, Kevin goes, yeah, I like it. I'm like, all right.
It kind of worked for me because I remember we sampled a bunch and I felt like that was the best one. That was like, but I was also like this a lot of the time. If it worked emotionally, I was down with it. So.
Well, I do obviously want to get to the Katherine twist of it all. Like, still throughout the series of the show, like one of the greatest twists, one of my favorite experiences in the world is watching the show with someone new and getting to that moment because you all walked that like perfect line to where if you're new and you're watching the show, it's Elena. But if you watch it knowing it's not, there are all these little moments where you can tell Katherine's kind of like, is he about to kiss Stefan's girlfriend? Like there are these different moments, but you mentioned Katherine wasn't necessarily always gonna come back in present day. So like, how did this twist kind of come about?
My dream was I wanted 10 twists in the finale. I think I got 6, but I wanted to have I wanted twist after twist after twist. I wanted a Knots Landing twist, and you guys are too young to remember Knots Landing. And when Knots Landing was working on all those cylinders, it would have like 4 or 5 twists at the end of the season. And you were just like, and I wanted that. I wanted a Knots Landing ending. But I don't want to take this away from another writer, but I think it was you who came up with the kiss on the porch.
I think that was Brian Young. And I might be taking it away from another writer, but I'm pretty sure because you came up with
I came up with Jenna inviting her in.
Yes. And Uncle John.
And I came up with it, and I said, and Jenna, someone has to invite the vampire in because no one knows it's Katherine. So Jenna does it in a scolding way, like you shouldn't be kissing Damon, get in here. And so she invited Katherine inside because I wanted that rule had to stick. I was getting so mad if we broke the rule. And then someone else came up with a kiss, and it was perfect because Elena and Damon needed to kiss, but we didn't want them to.
Exactly. We did not want them kissing at all. That was another like, holy shit. When Kevin pitched the Uncle John, hi John, goodbye John, hello John, goodbye John, like with the finger chopping, like everyone in the room was just like in awe.
Katherine. Hello, John. Goodbye, John.
I mean, that's just such an unbelievable stroke of genius, but it is the same thing. Like he and I grew up on soap operas, him like nighttime soap operas, me daytime soap operas. And like my favorite television historically and broadcast are shows that are constantly surprising the audience and ending the episode where you're like, oh my God, cliffhanger. The cliffhanger is this beautiful art form. And that set the standard for Vampire Diaries. That finale to me set the standard of like, we always have to fight to get as close to this amazing, awesome twist and cliffhanger ending as we possibly can. We can never let our audiences down with a finale. And we put so much pressure on ourselves for 8 years to make sure that we never failed a finale. And there were some that were better than others, but like we really, really, we took our finale seriously.
I was really proud of that one. I thought because it accomplished what we wanted. And that was I remember my brother, who never comments on my work at all, ever, ever, ever. And he said, now that was a good finale. And I went, okay, so if my brother liked it, he's a hard critic. So if he liked it, it's good.
And just that whole episode looks so good. Like they had like 5 minutes to prep it because, it's the end of the season. They probably didn't have a script until we were shooting for all I remember. Marcos, who's wonderful and brilliant, shot a full parade. They got full period costumes. They had fireworks. We had a fire. There was a carnival. There was so much shit going on in that episode.
Parking lot, so they had to build the basement in the parking lot so they could put it on fire. And I remember the day we were killing Anna, he called me. He did not want us to kill Anna. He did not want her to die. And he said, "Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure?" And and I'd be like, "Yeah." He said, "You sure?" Because he said, none of the crew down here wants to lose her. They love everyone. Loves
Melise, her. Yeah, and everyone loved her.
Has to die. Sorry, but it was so sad. She was great.
Oh my God, that's so funny. I completely forgot she was in season 1 because she's such
She died in the fire.
Yeah. Oh my God, because we used her so many more times.
She brought Jeremy to life. I thought she really made Jeremy pop.
Yeah.
And I thought they had a really nice thing going. So.
Oh my God.
Well, I read something at one point. At one point, were you all writing a companion series for Vampire Diaries?
Oh yeah, we wrote that paranormal. We know what we did is we were playing around with doing this paranormal show where at a university but it was more about possessions and ghosts and more scary stuff. But it was about this paranormal team at this university and it turns out that the only connection at all was there was one character who said, "Why don't we go investigate? There's this little town called Mystic Falls. Why don't we go there and investigate? They say there's vampires there." I went, "No, there's no such things." And then it was just
Yeah, I think we talked about maybe spinning off a lurk into that at one point. I can't remember, but it was basically meant to be a college ghost show.
And more supernatural than Vampire Diaries.
Yeah, but that lasted for about 3 minutes and then went away.
Yeah, and then the whole conversation I think turned once. Then the season, by the time we got to season 3 or 4, the whole conversation turned for Julie was all about the originals.
Sure. Yeah,
and that's where I think everything just sort of headed towards that. Which rightfully so.
I mean, is there anything else when you all think of season 1? Any other scenes? Any other moments you want to touch on?
Oh God, I think about the actors and Marcos sending us videos from set, so mad at us during Let the Right One In because we had written the rain towers. The whole beginning of why everybody wanted Damon and Elena to kiss in the rain is because of their intense scene face to face fighting with each other about Stefan. And it was shooting in the spring, it was March, but Atlanta had a cold snap because we didn't know that Atlanta wasn't warm. First of all, because, it's in Atlanta, it's in the South. The South is warm. So in my mind, it did not get, to frigid temperatures in Georgia. So there they were. It was 0 degree. I mean, it was so cold and there was rain pouring down all over all of them. And it was the middle of the night at a huge night shoot and they were furious. Little Blair Witch videos. I can't feel my face.
By the way, that's not the first time Marcos. And then we did the following, and Marcos did the same thing. We were freezing him out in New York, and he would send videos of them frozen. The camera would freeze. We'd have to get the hair and makeup would have to come out and blow dry the camera to get it done. It was horrible.
We hit our fair share, and then we had snowpocalypse in Atlanta. It snowed 2 inches, but the whole city shut down for 2 weeks.
That's why we built the forest inside. That we ended up not really using, but we built it inside because it was so cold. The thing I remember the most is how we utilized, we didn't have a lot of money and we just utilized what we had. We walked to this production office and we said, "Are those woods out there?" And they're like, "Yeah." "Are they part of our property?" And they're like, "Yeah." And so next thing you know, Julie and I are scouting them for what can we do in the woods and what can we do, the well and then the church. And we just did what I thought we were very sort of, the show kind of came over. The storylines were taken. It's crazy where storylines come from.
Yeah, no, completely. Pascal, our line producer, Pascal Versquez, would call and be like, "I'm going to build this," and we'd say, "Great," and he's like, "You're going to have to use it again. I'll make it into something else, but you're going to have to use it again." And so we come up with the whole story. But the signature success of that season, which I wouldn't recommend to anybody because it was the hardest thing probably you or I have ever done in our lives, but our best scripts that season were written probably in 36 hours or less. because we would suffer so much trying to break the story, find the story. We'd have like an early draft written by another writer that we decided we didn't like the way the story was working. And then it would be like, what's the script going to be? What's the story? How's it going to work? And we would sit and suffer and pitch and pitch and pitch and suffer. So by the time it finally, like the story finally broke, we were already so late. It was so late. We were getting yelled at by Marcos and by actors all the time. Like the only people that weren't yelling at us, thank God, was the studio and the network, because they were so happy with everything they got. They were like, all right, get it to us when you get to us. But like everyone else was always upset with us. And I would say, I mean, it was, remember the Bonnie, Emily Bennett episode, the ghost episode.
Mm-hmm.
Kev, I think you and I and Brian wrote that in like a night.
I don't do that anymore. Because
no, it's terrible.
I mean, we tortured the writers. Yeah. We need to we still should send them all gift baskets every day until they die because we tortured them so much.
Lost Girls, we wrote, I think we had act 1 and 2 that we'd been working on for a couple of days that were incomplete. And then we ended up writing the entire Lost Girls overnight. Let the Right One In, wrote over like in 24-hour period, delivered it at 6 a.m. and got a phone call from Marcos at 9:30 telling me it was unproducible. And I put a rule in place because I was so pissed. I'd slept like 2.5 hours and that script had been a really hard one to break and a really hard one to get done. And I said, no one is allowed to call a writer less than 8 hours after they've delivered a script that they pulled an all-nighter on to tell them what's not gonna work. That is just not okay.
He did really good though. He was good because he was like, "You
amazing.
can't ding me. You can't ding me. You can't ding me." And I think that was the one where he called him and goes, "You ding me."
Oh, amazing! All right. I mean, I feel like that's the gist of season 1. I mean, thank you both so much for being here, and for everyone watching and listening. We will be back, episode 2, all about season 2.
Yay!